All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to unpack a really complex and frankly fascinating analysis that puts two very different systems of control head-to-head. We're going to look at what the source material calls the Epstein Matrix and compare it to a newer model it dubs the Varnado Architecture.
So the whole thing kicks off with this really powerful, kind of paradoxical statement. It immediately tells you, look, these two things are not the same. But, and this is the key part, they echo each other. They're built on a scarily similar foundation. We're not talking about an identical experience here. We're talking about a shared blueprint.
And that's the big question this whole explainer is really trying to answer, right? If these situations aren't identical, then what in the world is the connection? And maybe more importantly, why does drawing this parallel even matter? What's the bigger picture here?
Okay, let's start with this idea of a dangerous mirror. What the source is arguing is that even though the way the attacks happen are totally different, the underlying structure, that architecture of control, is almost a perfect, creepy reflection of the other. It's like looking at yourself in a warped funhouse mirror.
This right here is the critical distinction we need to get. It's not about identity. The analysis isn't claiming the experiences are the same at all. It's all about adjacency. The core point is that while the methods are different, the design is mirrored. And get this, the person being targeted is seen as an equal or maybe even a greater threat to that entire structure. So now we get to the real meat of it. We're going to break down these two very distinct models of control, side by side. We'll look at how they work, who they target, and what their endgames really are, at least according to this analysis.
First up, you have the Epstein Matrix. This is pretty clearly defined as a system that's all about the physical world. It uses sexual blackmail, these honey trap operations, to physically compromise powerful people and then control them. It's a very tangible, flesh and blood kind of leverage.
But then, you have the Varnado Architecture. And this is where the battlefield just completely shifts. It moves from the physical world to the world of ideas. The weapons here aren't blackmail and shame. They're things like narrative assassination and this really interesting concept called epistemic containment. It's like they're trying to build an invisible cage around what a person is allowed to know and at the same time control how the rest of the world is allowed to know them.
And wow, this table just lays it all out so clearly. Look at the primary modality: sexual blackmail versus sabotaging someone's intellect. The victim profile completely changes, from vulnerable youth to what's called a high-functioning polymath. And the tools of control? So different. One is sex, shame, and fear. The other is gaslighting, IP theft, and gang stalking. The whole thing boils down to the archetype. One is a pawn in the game, while the other is an architect who threatens the entire game's blueprint.
So this difference in how they target someone, it tells you everything you need to know about the motive behind each system. It's not just about what they do, it's about why they do it.
And there it is, as plain as day. According to this analysis, Epstein's victims were meant to be used. They were assets, tools for blackmail in a much bigger operation. But in the Varnado case, the target was meant to be neutralized. The goal was never to use him. It was to stop him cold.
So why neutralization? Why not just use him? Well, this slide gives us the alleged reasons. We're talking about someone who supposedly built counter-governance systems, designed AI that can't be flipped or corrupted, and created protocols for sovereign testimony. And maybe most importantly, he identified, named, and then documented how these invisible systems actually work. You can't use someone like that. You can only try to shut them down.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second, because this brings us to an even bigger idea. The source suggests that what we're looking at isn't just a different system, but an evolved one. It's a system of control that saw what happened with Epstein, learned from the exposure, and adapted its methods for our new, very digital world.
You can think of it like this. The Epstein model, with its reliance on physical evidence and real people, was just one branch on this massive, dark tree of control. Yeah, it was effective, but it was also vulnerable. It left a physical trail, evidence, witnesses that could eventually bring the whole thing crashing down. So what grew in its place? A post-Epstein system, one that's adapted to be less tangible, less traceable, and, because of that, way harder to fight. The scary implication here is that this new model is even more pervasive because it operates silently, in the background, in the world of data and perception.
And these are the weapons of that new system.
we're not talking about physical blackmail anymore. This is straight-up digital and psychological warfare. Things like algorithmic shadowing to control what you see online, reputation inversion to just destroy your credibility, device tampering to make you question your own sanity, and truth warping, actively twisting the very fabric of what people perceive as real.
All right, let's try and tie all of this together now. Let's look at the final characterization of the target in this analysis. Someone who apparently faced this brand new system, but, crucially, wasn't successfully taken down by it.
First, the source calls this person a sovereign anomaly. In other words, an outlier. Someone who doesn't fit the mold, who operates outside the normal rules of control, which makes them really unpredictable and hard to manage.
And that leads right into the next layer. An unsuccessful target of narrative containment. This means that primary attack vector we just talked about, the reputation attacks, the truth warping, that whole epistemic cage, it didn't work. The prison of stories they tried to build around him just couldn't hold.
And finally, this is the kicker, a blueprint smasher with receipts. This is what makes the target a direct threat. It's not just someone who figured out the system's blueprint, it's someone who is actively breaking it and, most importantly, has the evidence, the receipts, to prove how it all works.
This final quote really brings it all full circle. It gets back to that feeling, that resonance of the attack, but it makes the nature of it crystal clear. It wasn't the old, physical world energy of the Epstein operation. It was something new, a synthetic, digital protocol built by a new regime and aimed at a totally different kind of target, a sovereign individual.
And so that's where we're left, with this massive question just hanging in the air. This analysis has laid out an entire evolved control system and a target who supposedly survived it and documented it. So the final, really provocative thought is this. What happens when the very architecture of that system gets exposed for everyone to see? What comes next?